6 weeks into a federal abduction investigation, the FBI came back to a quiet street in the Catalina foothills of Tucson. Not to canvass, not to knock on doors they hadn't tried yet. They came back with something specific, a question about one specific house. A house that had been sitting there, dark windows, no cars in the driveway, no sign of life, since right around the time Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The neighbors had already been asking about it. One of them had been asking about it since the first week. She wanted investigators to go inside. She said it plainly. She was specific. And now, 6 weeks later, the FBI was on her street, asking the exact same question she had been raising since February. That house was not empty. That is not speculation. That is not a theory someone posted online. That is the framework federal investigators are working from right now, backed by forensic science, by 30 years of SWAT command expertise, and by the documented behavior of whoever took an 84-year-old woman from her home in the middle of the night. What was inside that house? We are going to answer that today, and what we find is going to change the way you understand this entire case. Everything you are about to hear is grounded in real sources, named sources. News Nation's senior investigative reporter, Brian Anton, who has been embedded in this case since the beginning. Parade Magazine's exclusive interview with retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger, a man who spent nearly 3 decades working these exact neighborhoods. The publicly confirmed statements of Sheriff Chris Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Office. A forensic methodology from working investigators and genetic genealogy experts. Court-documented techniques used in cases the FBI has already closed. No speculation is presented as fact here. Where we analyze, we say so. Where experts speak, we name them. This is not rumor. This is the work. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives alone in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood in Tucson, Arizona. She takes daily medication. On the night of February 1st, 2025, she was taken from her home. There was no ransom demand. There was no goodbye. There was no body found. The FBI opened a federal investigation. The Pima County Sheriff's Office confirmed that mixed DNA, genetic material from more than one person that does not belong to Nancy or anyone in her inner circle, was recovered from inside her home. Sheriff Chris Nanos said publicly, and I am quoting him directly, "We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect. The FBI has received more than 13,000 tips. The family has put up a $1 million reward. The FBI has added $100,000 on top of that. And still, as of the time this video was made, Nancy has not been found." Now here is where today's revelation changes everything. The question was never just what happened inside Nancy's home. The question is what happened in the weeks before that night. And the answer to that question may be sitting in a house that everyone assumed was vacant. On March 17, 2025, day 45 of the investigation, News Nation's Brian Anton went live on his YouTube channel with something that had not been reported anywhere else. The FBI had returned to the Catalina Foothills neighborhood, not on routine patrol, not to re-canvass streets they had already worked. They came back with a specific focus, a property that had been vacated by its occupant before Nancy disappeared. Agents were going door to door asking neighbors about it, about who lived there, about when they left, about what the neighbors had seen and heard in the weeks leading up to February 1st. Anton was careful, and credit to him for that. He was not saying the house was confirmed as connected to the crime. He was saying the FBI wanted to know more about whoever lived there and exactly when they were gone. Those are two different things, but they are both significant. And then he went further. Running simultaneously with the vacant house inquiry, the FBI was asking every neighbor on that street for the names of construction workers who had worked on nearby houses in the days and weeks before Nancy disappeared. Not a general description of activity. Not, was there construction nearby? The specific names of individual workers matched to individual projects, matched to specific time windows. That level of targeting does not come from a routine investigation. That is what investigators do when they believe someone used legitimate proximity as cover. When they believe someone had a reason to be in that neighborhood, a reason that looked ordinary from the outside, and used that reason to get close. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Craigier, who spent nearly 30 years working law enforcement in this exact county, I told Parade magazine in an exclusive interview what a property like that could mean. His words, a vacant home, could look at that location as a possible home base or staging location for the suspect or suspects. It would provide them a cover story to be at those locations at different times. Read that slowly. A cover story to be at those locations at different times. Not once. Repeatedly. A reason to be in the neighborhood that no one would question. A car in a driveway that belongs there. Lights that come and go. Somebody who is simply, unremarkably, home. And from inside that cover, according to Craigier, a person could be a little bit more under the radar, to see the activity of the neighborhood, to see the comings and goings of people, the timing of things, of all the people, including Nancy. Including Nancy. That one sentence reframes this entire investigation, because if someone was in that house watching her, learning her patterns, timing her routine, counting the hours between when her lights went off and when the neighborhood went quiet, then what happened on February 1st was not impulsive. It was executed. The neighbors saw it before the FBI came back to ask about it. That matters. Aldine Meister has lived in the Catalina foothills for nearly 30 years. That is not a detail. That is a credential. When you live on the same quiet street for 3 decades, you build a mental map of normal that most people never develop. You know which cars belong. You know which houses turn over renters and which stay stable. You know what a vacancy is supposed to look like. She told Brian Anton directly, "The neighbors on the other side of me moved out." And then she told him she had been asking investigators to check that house, not suggesting it, not wondering about it. Actively, specifically asking law enforcement to go inside. They did not go immediately. That is the first data point. A 30-year resident with the kind of hyper-calibrated neighborhood awareness that money cannot buy and training cannot manufacture looked at that house and knew something was wrong with it. Now hold that thought. Because Aldine Meister also reported something else. Approximately 2 to 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared, in the window the FBI has since identified as operationally significant, she saw a stranger in the neighborhood, not a neighbor she didn't recognize, not a worker she couldn't place, on someone who moved through the area in a way that her 3 decades of calibration registered as wrong. She could not make out his face, but she tracked him. She noted his hat, and she came away with one clear conclusion. He did not belong there. He just didn't fit. One neighbor, 2 separate observations. A stranger who didn't fit, 2 to 3 weeks out. A rental that emptied right around February 1st. Then there is Laura Gargano. A second neighbor, speaking separately to Brian Anton, described the timing this way. Whoever lived there had moved out within a few days of this happening. She was talking about Nancy's disappearance. She confirmed it with neighbors. The vehicles were gone. Her security camera only reached to the end of her own driveway, not far enough to capture the rental property itself, but far enough to see that something had shifted. She made a call to investigators. Now step back and read these 2 accounts together. 2 separate people, 2 separate vantage points, both of them noticing the same anomaly from different angles. One tracking a stranger on foot, one tracking the vacancy by the cars that disappeared. Neither one with hard evidence, both with real, specific, documented observations. And 6 weeks later, 6 weeks, the FBI is on that street asking exactly the questions these 2 women had already been raising. That is not coincidence. That is an investigation catching up to what a community already felt. Here is where it gets heavier. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffin-Doffer noted publicly that the family's own timeline request, asking the public to focus on January 11th specifically, At 3 weeks before the abduction, suggests the suspect conducted a reconnaissance visit, a trial run, going to Nancy's property, assessing her security, timing her movements, testing whether his cover would hold. January 11th. If someone was in that rental house in January, using it as their base of operations, and if their phone was pinging cell towers in the Catalina foothills on the night of January 11th, those two facts do not remain separate for long. Cell tower records are subpoenable. MAC address logs from routers are subpoenable. The FBI has done both in federal investigations far less serious than the abduction of an 84-year-old woman. This is no longer a neighborhood curiosity. This is the architecture of premeditation. And there is a pattern forming, a pattern of a person who did not act on impulse, who selected a target, who positioned himself, who waited, and who moved only when he knew exactly what he was walking into. That pattern did not begin on February 1st. It began weeks earlier, in a house that everyone thought was empty. When investigators returned to the Catalina foothills neighborhood on day 45, they did not announce what they found. They did not hold a press conference. They did not update the community that had been watching and waiting and checking their cameras every time a new car rolled down the street. The FBI's Phoenix field office, when asked directly by Newsweek for comment on the vacant property inquiry, gave the answer it always gives. They do not comment on ongoing investigations. Now I want to be fair about what that silence is and what it is not. A reasonable person might expect some kind of public accounting. The FBI returns to a neighborhood. Federal agents are going door to door asking specific questions about a specific property. Neighbors who have been living with this for 6 weeks, neighbors who have been asking about that house since the first week, deserve to know that their tips were heard, that they were taken seriously, that the information they handed over is being used. What they got was silence. Coffin Doffer addressed this directly. She said, "Nancy's case is red hot behind the scenes. Just because we don't see what the FBI is investigating, I assure you, they are drinking from a fire hose with more investigative leads than most cases ever have." That is a retired federal agent with direct knowledge of how these operations work. She is not speculating. She is describing what she knows about the pace and intensity of a federal abduction investigation with this much evidence in play. But here is the tension that does not go away. Aldine Meister asked investigators to check that house in the first week. The first week, she was specific, she was persistent. And for 45 days, the public answer was nothing. No confirmation, no update, no acknowledgement that the tip had even landed anywhere. A 30-year resident of that neighborhood raised a flag, and for 6 weeks, that flag was invisible from the outside. The FBI's silence is not evidence of failure. It is operational procedure designed to protect a prosecution that may be coming together. But for the people who live on that street, for the community that is still sleeping with one eye open, procedure and justice feel like different things right now. Here is what forensic science tells us about what that house contains. Not theoretically, not in the abstract, as a matter of documented investigative methodology. Every human being sheds biological material constantly. Skin cells at roughly 30,000 to 40,000 per hour. Hair. Saliva transferred to anything a person touches at face height. Perspiration deposited into the fibers of every chair, every couch, every surface where a body rests. In a property where someone lived, even temporarily, even for a few weeks, this material does not disappear when they leave. Forensic scientists call it touch DNA. So the concept is exactly what it sounds like. Genetic material deposited not by a dramatic biological event, but simply by the act of being present and touching surfaces over time. In a rental property, this becomes enormously significant for one specific reason. The pool of people who had a legitimate reason to be in that house is small and documentable. The property manager knows who signed the lease. Prior tenants can be interviewed. Their DNA can be collected voluntarily and eliminated from the sample. What remains after that elimination process is anomalous biological material from someone who should not have been there. That anomaly is what federal evidence response teams were built to find. Bob Kriegier took the forensic logic one step further. Speaking to Parade, he described the operational value of the property in terms that go beyond a place to sleep. He said a vacant home out of the prying eye of the neighborhood could also be used to set up surveillance equipment, cameras, positioned inside a structure where no one expects to see them, pointed at one woman's home. Forensic processing of surveillance equipment after the fact is not clean work, but it is possible work. Mounting holes in walls leave traces even when filled. Adhesive pads leave chemical residue that can be matched to specific device categories. Cable routing leaves marks along baseboards and trim. And storage media, the small cards and drives that record footage, can be left behind in the urgency of a departure, wedged behind a vent, dropped in a wall cavity, overlooked in the hour when someone is trying to disappear. If that storage media remained in that house, it could contain weeks of recorded footage of Nancy's front door, her driveway, her comings and goings, the raw material of surveillance. Independent investigative reporter J.L.R. reported separately that federal agents had also been visiting a house under construction near Camino Escalante and Camino Miraval, just down the street from Nancy's home, multiple times, walking the property, checking sheds, interviewing workers individually. This reporting has not been confirmed by the FBI, consistent with their policy, but it aligns precisely with what Anton described. Think about what it means that both threads are being pulled simultaneously. The vacant rental, the construction workers, two different kinds of cover, in two different mechanisms by which a person could be in that neighborhood for an extended period without triggering suspicion. Investigators do not pursue parallel inquiries like this on a hunch. They pursue them when a working theory suggests both threads may lead to the same place, and then there is the DNA already in evidence. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that mixed DNA was recovered from inside Nancy's home, a sample containing genetic material from more than one person. The FBI ran it against CODIS, the National Database of Convicted Offender Profiles, and found no match. The sample has challenges. It is mixed. Lab work separating the profiles could take up to a year. C.C. Moore, chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, told NewsNation, "As long as you have a viable DNA sample, that person can be identified. Eventually. But there is a second path, and it does not depend on sample quality or on whether the suspect's relatives have uploaded their profiles to a public ancestry database. If the vacant house yields biological material, touched DNA from a windowsill, from the chair angled toward Nancy's home, from a surface a person contacted repeatedly during weeks of surveillance, then investigators have DNA from two separate crime scenes. The comparison then becomes precise. Does the DNA from the vacant property match the unknown profile from inside Nancy's home? Is the same person in both places? Two separate scenes, two separate collection processes, independent chain of custody, same profile in both. In a federal prosecution, that is not just additional evidence. That is a fundamentally different evidentiary architecture. A defense attorney can challenge contamination at one scene, can raise chain of custody questions about one sample. But explaining the same DNA in two separate locations, both connected to the same victim and the same window of time, requires an explanation that does not exist if the person is guilty. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She takes daily medication. That is not a footnote. That is a clock that has been running since February 1st, and it does not pause for investigations or press conferences or careful legal procedure. Her daughter Savannah came back to social media after weeks of silence and said, "I still have hope. I still believe. I'm still me." Read that again. I'm still me. A daughter who watched her mother disappear in the middle of the night, who has spent weeks living inside the silence of a federal investigation, who has had to hold herself together while the public watches and waits. And she is still saying she has hope. Nancy has grandchildren. She had routines. She had a neighborhood she knew and neighbors who knew her. She had a life that someone decided to take from her. Every forensic detail in this video, every documented methodology, every legal framework, it all comes back to one woman, 84 years old, still out there, still needing to be found. I want to be clear about exactly what this video is and is not saying. This video is not saying the vacant house is confirmed as connected to Nancy's disappearance. It is not saying the FBI found DNA inside that property. It is not saying surveillance equipment was recovered. It is not saying any individual has been identified, named, or implicated. No person has been charged in this case. No individual has been publicly named as a suspect by law enforcement. Any characterization of unknown individuals in this video refers to hypothetical scenarios grounded in documented forensic methodology. What this video is saying is this. The FBI returned to Nancy's neighborhood on day 45 with specific questions about a specific property. 2 neighbors had already been raising those questions since the first week. A retired SWAT commander with nearly 3 decades in Pima County described on the record the operational logic of using a vacant rental as a staging location. Forensic science confirms what evidence accumulates in such locations. And the framework of this investigation, the DNA, the timeline, the parallel construction worker inquiry, is consistent with an investigation that has significantly narrowed its focus. The methodology is real. The sources are named. The facts are documented. Here is the question that nobody with institutional authority is willing to ask publicly. If the FBI entered that house, and we have every reason to believe they did, because federal agents do not spend 6 weeks asking neighbors about a property and then fail to process it, then what did they find? The Phoenix Field Office will not say. The Pima County Sheriff's Office will not say. The property manager is not talking. The prior tenant, whoever that is, has not been publicly identified by anyone in law enforcement. 45 days of a federal investigation, 2 neighbors waving a flag from day 1, under a retired SWAT commander going on record about staging locations and surveillance equipment, and the house that sits at the center of all of it remains officially unremarked upon. The FBI's silence is not a dead end. It may be the loudest signal in this entire case. Federal investigators do not maintain operational silence about properties they cleared. They maintain it about properties that are active, properties that are still building toward something, properties where what was found is not ready to be handed to a defense attorney on a press conference transcript. The people who should be asking this question publicly, the Arizona congressional delegation, the DOJ oversight structure, the journalists who cover federal law enforcement, are not asking it with the volume it deserves. So that task falls to everyone watching this. Because the way a question gets loud enough to demand an answer is when enough people refuse to let it go quiet. Nancy is still out there. The medication clock is still running. Her daughter still has hope. The empty house next to Nancy's was not empty. The FBI saw. And somewhere in a federal evidence vault or a lab in Quantico or a case file that is still being assembled, the record of what was inside that house may already exist. We need to find out what it says. If Nancy Guthrie means anything to you, stay on this case. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because the DNA analysis, the cell tower data, and the construction worker investigation are all converging on a window of time that has not been fully publicly examined yet, and I will cover every development the moment it breaks. I'd leave a comment answering this. What do you think the FBI found in that house? And if you know anything at all, about what happened to Nancy, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The family's reward is $1 million. The FBI has added $100,000. Nancy needs her medication. Time is not on anyone's side. Share this video. The question only gets loud enough to demand an answer if enough people are asking it. All information in this script is based on publicly reported sources, including News Nation, Parade Magazine, and official statements from the Pima County Sheriff's Office and FBI. No individual has been charged or named as a suspect. All forensic analysis reflects established investigative methodology, not confirmed discoveries in this case.